Let's talk about your money. We all have it, we all use it, but do we have any idea what it's really doing out there in the world? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on that very question. We're diving into something called impact reporting, and it's completely changing the game.
But before we can talk about the solution, we have to understand the problem. And it's a big one. It all boils down to a serious lack of transparency in the financial world.
I mean, think about it for a second. When you put your money in a bank, or invest in a company, or even just buy a product, that capital goes on a journey. But where does it end up? What is it funding? For most of us, that's a total black box.
And people are starting to say, no more. This isn't just about feeling good either. Investors, from regular folks with a retirement account to massive global funds, are realizing that a company's impact on the planet and society, well, that can seriously affect the bottom line. It's about risk, it's about opportunity, and they are demanding to see the receipts.
And that demand, that's where impact reporting steps in. It's the tool that's being built to crack open that black box and finally connect our money to its real-world consequences.
So what is it exactly? Well, at its heart, impact reporting is a system. It's a structured way for companies to measure and talk about the actual effects they're having, both the good and the bad. We're not talking about slick marketing campaigns here. We're talking about real, tangible data on how investments affect our world.
You know, a really great way to think about it is like a bridge. On one side, you have all the investors shouting, "Show us what you're doing!" And on the other side, you've got the companies who need a way to actually prove that they're being responsible with that money. Impact reporting is that bridge connecting the two.
And this really shows you how that bridge works in both directions. Investors need proof, cold, hard evidence, that a company knows its key environmental, social, and governance issues, what's called ESG, and that they actually have a plan to deal with them. At the same time, the company needs to know what investors actually care about, so they're not just shouting into the void. It's a two-way conversation. So how do you build a rapport that people can actually trust? It's definitely not as simple as just throwing a few positive numbers on a web page and calling it a day. It all comes down to this one absolutely critical idea: transparency. If a report isn't totally honest about what it's measuring, how it's measuring it, and where the data comes from, well, then the whole thing is pretty much worthless. It has to be built on a foundation of trust.
To get there, any organization creating a report has to make 4 really big decisions. First, the scope. What are we even measuring? You can't track everything. Second, the data and methodology. Okay, how are we calculating this stuff, and can we prove our numbers are legit? Third is the framework. You have to follow a set of established rules so your report can be compared to others. And finally, frequency. How often are you going to share this information?
And a great report needs 2 key ingredients. You need the quantitative stuff, the hard numbers, the charts, the data, but that's only half the story. You also need the qualitative, the context, the strategy, the narrative that explains what those numbers actually mean. One without the other just doesn't work.
Okay, let's take all of this and look at it through the lens of one of the single most important issues of our time: climate change.
Here's the scary part for investors. Climate change brings enormous financial risks. But if companies aren't open about those risks, investors are flying blind. It means that, right now, the value of many companies might be fundamentally wrong because a huge piece of the risk puzzle is missing. So to fix this, the financial industry is rallying around a single standard. It's called the TCFD. That's the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. It's basically a rule book for climate reporting, and it's built on 4 main pillars you see here: governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics. The first pillar, governance, is pretty simple. It asks, who's in charge? It forces a company to be clear about whether the board of directors is overseeing this stuff and what management's actual job is when it comes to climate risks. You know, where does the buck stop?
Next up is strategy. This is the forward-looking part. It's not enough to know today's risks. Companies have to explain how climate change will affect their business down the road. They even have to stress test their own strategies against different possible futures, like, hey, what does our business look like in a world that actually hits its climate goals? Pillar 3 is risk management, and this gets into the how. How, specifically, does a company find and evaluate its climate risks? And crucially, it requires them to show that climate risk isn't just some side project. It has to be baked into the company's main risk management system right alongside all the other financial and operational stuff. And finally, Pillar 4, metrics and targets. This is where the rubber really meets the road. This is all about the data. Companies have to report their greenhouse gas emissions from their own factories, the electricity they buy, and even their supply chains. And they have to set clear targets and show everyone how they're doing. No hiding. So when you zoom out and look at all this, it becomes incredibly clear. This isn't some niche trend for environmentally friendly companies. This is a massive, fundamental shift in how finance itself works.
And this is happening everywhere. Regulators across the globe are putting new policies in place. They're making disclosures mandatory, and they're even creating official dictionaries called taxonomies that legally define what can and can't be called a sustainable investment. This is moving from voluntary to required fast.
So if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's that what started as a voluntary movement is quickly becoming the new global standard. Being transparent about your impact is no longer a nice to have. It's becoming a core requirement for doing business. Which, of course, leaves us with the biggest question of all. If we finally get to see exactly what our money is doing, will that knowledge actually empower us to change its course? Will it be enough to really change the world? Well, the tools are being built, the data is starting to flow. What happens next is really up to us.